Ever wondered how actors safely jump and punch through glass windows in movies? It's all thanks to this specially engineered prop glass, which is made with weak molecular bonds so that it shatters easily and spectacularly on camera.
I gotta say, I barely feel the impact.
Breakaway glass is just one type of super specialized movie prop you might not think about, from fake money to noiseless paper bags. Let's start with those noiseless props. Look at these two paper bags. They don't appear very different, but they sound different. One of these is a real everyday paper bag, and the other one is a silent prop. This fake paper bag was an innovation thought up by prop maker Tim Schultz.
Props is always about solving a problem.
And one of those problems is everyday objects that don't look distracting, but sound distracting.
I often say that a sound guy can hear grass growing when you're on location.
Silencing some props, like drums, can be fairly simple, like adding a drum mute. But others require getting a bit more creative. Like with pool balls, which were too loud for these two bar scenes in season 1 of Friday Night Lights.
Ooh, nice shot!
Property master Scott Reeder needed to find a ball that would create a softer sound on impact. First, he experimented with plastic balls from a ball pit. They were much quieter, but he couldn't get paint to stick to the surface. Then he remembered a trick he used on 1991's Necessary Roughness during a shot where a character is thrown onto a pool table in a bar fight. Reeder swapped real pool balls with racket balls so the actor would land on something softer.
We didn't really clue in at the time that, these would be good for sound.
Listen to how real pool balls sound.
It's too noisy.
Compared to the racket balls.
Much better.
To get it to look like the real thing, Reeder added a layer of primer to make sure the paint stuck, followed with a glossy spray to give off the signature shine of a real pool ball.
You gotta pick them up to tell that they're not real.
And Reeder also had to know when to swap the props in.
If actors are playing in a scene, we'll typically do real if the camera is going to see them hit the ball. And then when the camera goes to where it's just on their face, we'll throw the fake ones on the table so they can actually play pool. That way the sound man can catch the dialogue.
Prop masters don't always need to find a replacement. Some silent props are made by just modifying the real thing. For example, in this scene in Tammy, actress Melissa McCarthy needed to wear a paper bag on her head to hide her identity and another one on her hand to hide a gun. Schultz said it was important for her to use the real thing. But a real paper bag would sound something like this.
Just get pie. You want some pies?
Oh, I pie.
Well, get a pile for you. Get a pile for...
Quieting these real bags down meant adding more weight to them. So Schultz sprayed the bags with a mix of water and glycerin, which is typically used to add the appearance of sweat or water droplets on anything from human skin to beer bottles.
It takes quite a bit of time. Well, it takes time and finesse because you don't want to overdo it.
He also taped the bags inside to hold them together and prevent them from crumbling. But this fix was only temporary, since the bags would eventually lose their color and fall apart over time. And this wouldn't work for when actors have to handle bags consistently. So for other projects, Schultz developed a quiet, durable alternative using fibrous, non-woven fabric. This is actually the same material as coffee filters. To make it look like the real thing, Schultz wraps the fabric around a mold. Then he glues and folds the sides by hand.
We're trying to copy the bottom of a standard bag that's really made by a machine. It's important to get the corners so that they're square. A lot of times when we're using them, we'll crinkle them and make them look more used so they have a more realistic look. Instead of cutting it smooth, it's going to cut it with a little jagged edge to it.
This fabric can be used on other paper products as well, like when this butcher in the Kaminsky method talks to Alan Arkin while grabbing a handful of cold cuts. That butcher paper? Fake. It's these small handheld props that give prop masters the most trouble, especially in scenes with dialogue. For example, an actor with a drink will likely hold it near their midsection, where microphones are often attached. It's especially important to make sure whatever is in that drink doesn't produce any unwanted sounds. So if you're watching a show like Entourage with lots of scenes at parties and bars, it's safe to assume that these ice cubes are all fake. But not all fake ice is the same. Plastic cubes don't melt, which is great for continuity, but they're still really loud. So when sound is crucial, Schultz often opts for another type of fake cubes. These ones made out of silicone. These rubber cubes can either be molded in trays or ripped apart. Since the final product floats in a glass, they look more convincing. And best of all, they're completely silent.
Background actors can move this stuff around without having to worry about the sound.
So when this waitress walks by with a tray full of cups with ice, you can hear,
"What time's dinner? We're starving."
and not.
"What time's dinner? We're starving."
While ice cubes only pop up in certain moments, other loud materials are everywhere, like plastic. Everything from sandwich bags to potato chip bags make loud crackles, so Schultz will create fake ones out of vinyl.
So this material, it's a dull sound.
And it comes in handy for other places you might not expect, like flower bouquets that are wrapped in cellophane. Take this moment from the Kaminsky Method, where Michael Douglas's character brings flowers to an ailing friend. If Schultz had used real cellophane for the bouquet, all the sound team would hear is,
"What kind of flowers are those?" "I have no idea."
So he used a transparent vinyl material to replicate the look without all the noise.
"What kind of flowers are those?" "I have no idea." So your daughter bought them?" "Yeah."
But no solution is one size fits all.
Noisy tissue, but a quiet bag. Still doesn't solve the problem.
Some objects need multiple layers of silent material to effectively kill any noise, like with these gift bags.
So, quiet tissue, quiet bag, done.
So next time you see a scene set in a grocery store, a bar, or even just around the office, look twice at the everyday objects you can see but can't hear. We can all thank the prop makers for that.
Guys, I'm at New Rule Effects, and today I'm going to learn how they make breakable props for movies and TV shows. Let's check it out. From sinewy bones to fake blood to fake weapons, New Rule Effects provides Hollywood with all kinds of props and effects. But there's one thing they truly specialize in: breakaway props and effects. The kinds of products you see in a movie that are meant to be broken. This is Ryan Johnson. He's the owner of New Rule. You've seen New Rule's work in many places before. The FX studio showed us how breakable props are made, when and how they're used, and then they let us put a few of their coolest products to the test.
Heads up!
It's like getting hit with like a Nerf bat or something.
To make a breakaway prop, they take an actual object, like a glass bottle, and create a mold for it. A very hot resin plastic material is used and is then poured into a negative. After either a few hours, or even a few days, they'll have a hardened final replica that is light and meant to be broken. Other objects, like chairs and cinder blocks, are vacuum formed and 3D printed. But why do they shatter so easily?
They break very easily because A, they're very, very brittle, and they have a very weak molecular bond. So the molecules in the substance are very, very weak, and so it breaks very easy on any kind of impact.
This stuff is designed for absolute safety.
The level of safety that's required on the set is determined by how the prop is going to be seen in the film. If it's a bottle that's being broken over a head, for example, we have to make sure that the resin is thin enough so it'll break easily and safely. We'll engineer the prop so that it performs in the way that's specific to the script.
And with that, we are ready to try a few of these out.
You know, breaks like a bottle as well.
How about heads up next time on that?
Okay, heads up!
I gotta say, like, that doesn't, I mean, I barely feel the impact.
Yeah,
You know
they're
what I mean?
very light. Like if you have a ring,
Okay.
if you pop it with the ring first, it'll just literally fall apart.
Okay.
Yeah, and you don't even have to squeeze it that hard, but
It's just like.
it should- Wild man.
Glug, 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 glug. If like I'm looking at this and I'm like, this looks like glass, like I'm still kind of like afraid to touch it.
So for a big breakaway window effect, what we usually try to do is actually a lot of smaller panes that are all glued together into a balsa wood frame.
This might be for a scene in which a character might have to punch through a window.
You have to be a little bit careful when you're using breakaway glass, especially with the larger pieces, because they are going to break in really sharp shards. But if you just punch like straight through it, it would, break.
Now, for a scene in which something much bigger than a fist, like a full body or even a car goes through the glass, that window will be made with tempered glass, which will actually be shattered a fraction of a second before anything actually goes through the glass with the help of a pyrotechnic device.
All right, now go get me the fake one. No, that wasn't bad at all, actually. It looks like a big solid brick, but it's actually like a hard sponge. That's ridiculous how light this is.
Household products like plates, mugs, and vases can also be made to be broken. Now, there are a few other tricks to make convincing breakable objects. Sometimes they'll use rubber glass shards. Those can be used in a scene where a character has to walk over glass. Die Hard!
I tell everybody slow down, let the camera capture the action. So if you go a little bit slower, you end up with bigger shards.
So, let's slow a few of these down.
I really enjoyed smashing things and breaking all the bricks. I learned that as difficult as they are to make, it's a lot harder to make something that's breakable that also looks realistic, but there's just something so satisfying about breaking a bottle or a brick or a chair. There was a childhood fantasy come true.
Is this food making you hungry? Well, don't try to take a bite, because these delicious looking foods are actually fake. TV shows and movies will try to use real foods on screen when possible, but there are a number of reasons why food props might be used instead. For example, if ice cream is used, they don't want it to melt between takes, or if you need a lot of food in the background of a shot. Companies like Independent Studio Services and Display Fake Foods offer pre-made food props that can be ordered in bulk. But oftentimes, movies need items specially made. That's when they seek out a fake food artist, like Lisa Friedman.
For people who need something specific, that's why they reach out to me. I'm an artist. I went to school for art, and I also love to cook and bake. There's not a lot of us out there that do this.
Brenda Chapman also makes fake foods in Oklahoma.
I just kind of figure it out. So I've had no formal training, didn't go to college, started this just so I could be a stay-at-home mom with my kids.
Both women work out of studios in their homes. They can recreate pretty much anything. Much of their day-to-day business is in restaurant displays and food shows, but prop masters will contact them if they need food items for movies.
In the last 20 years, I've done almost $3 million worth of fake food business.
Brenda has had her work featured in a number of productions. For Glee, she made some ice cream for this diner scene.
In their diner scene, they wanted milkshakes and hot fudge sundaes and banana splits that were new, half-eaten, quarter-eaten, so that they could switch them out during the takes.
She says you don't always know where your food will end up, like when some of her items popped up in The Muppets.
When Miss Piggy Eats My Donuts, I didn't realize that they had bought my donuts.
Mademoiselle Cochonnet? Of course.
And sometimes your food doesn't even make the final cut.
Thor, the movie, actually bought like $500 worth of donuts, and they had a building that said donut shop or donut plant. They never went inside, so I didn't see my donuts. It was very sad.
Here's a creamsicle Lisa Friedman made that was featured in a scene from Kevin Probably Saves the World.
The coldest thing they have.
Oh, thank you.
I guess his eye was swollen, he got hit in it.
While the details may vary based on the artist, the creation process is pretty standard. We stopped by Lisa Friedman's home in New York to see how she makes her fake foods. After the order is submitted, typically the customer will send her a real version of the food they want duplicated. Then she will produce a mold out of the item to get the exact size and shape.
We try to mold it close to the color so that we're not starting with a blank white canvas.
Typically, fake foods are made with rubber or foam. She pours the material into the mold and lets it set. Foam rises like actual dough, so she needs to prevent it from spilling out.
It's like I'm baking a cake, right? I'm baking my bread.
Then she sands the excess pieces down. Once the item is dry, it's painted and detailed to look like real food.
With my background in painting, I can color it to be as, as realistic as it is.
You just kind of have to look at things a little differently and think, okay, it's not made for this, but it does look like this. We do use a lot of styrofoams, a lot of just stuff from the local hardware store, caulking and drywall patching and sheetrock mud.
To replicate granola and ground beef, Lisa uses crushed corkboard.
Cork is kind of breaks up like granola, so we took some cork boards and we started breaking it down.
Sometimes real food is used, like covering actual popcorn, cereal, or candy in resin to preserve it. It's often hard to tell the finished product from the original.
I don't do this for the money, it's kind of more for the accolades when my customers write, "Oh, I love it, it came out great."
And while these items might make your mouth water, they're only a feast for your eyes.
What you're seeing here isn't a real cockroach. It's actually a cleverly disguised date, a trick Melissa McSorley mastered for a scene from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, where a character picks up a live cockroach and eats it whole.
It's an opportunity to do something that's out of the normal realm for me, and it gives me an opportunity to start coming up with ways to tackle it.
Most props are meant to be picked up and handled, but some need to be consumed. That's where food stylists like Melissa come in and transform seaweed and chili threads into cockroach legs and antennae. So how can she make everything from live bugs to guts to blood edible? And do they actually taste good?
Seaweed crunch, right? That's really smart because it's going to make crunchy because I got nothing to crunch.
Food stylists are used to solve problems like making sure ice cream doesn't melt or finding a convincing substitute for runny yolks. When it comes to replicating things one normally wouldn't eat, Melissa has to use edible ingredients that create the same look as the non-edible prop, like blood. Typical fake human blood isn't toxic, and an actor can even have a little around their mouth. But when Melissa worked on True Blood, she needed something safe enough for vampire characters to drink in large amounts. She started with a mix of cranberry and pomegranate juice, great for scenes where a glass or bottle was just sitting out or being held. But she also had to replicate the true properties of blood, like its opaqueness, which is why she added wheatgrass to her formula. And there isn't just red food coloring in there.
I had to add a little blue because these juices were far more red than blood would normally be, so I just had to tamp it down a little.
As a former phlebotomist, Melissa knew that these small details would add to the realism, so she also focused on the viscosity of the blood.
If it was a scene where you would see them pick up the glass and drink and put it down, you would want to see the blood adhere to the side and slowly go down.
To achieve this effect, she thickened her concoction with methocellulose.
And then if someone were to drink it, you can see that it will slide back down the side of the glass.
Cheers.
This is really good. This is it tastes just like really fine juice because it's so thick. If I was on the True Blood set, they'd be like, stop drinking that, drink something else.
Sometimes productions want an edible prop even if the actors aren't planning on eating it, like this scene from the Amazon series Homecoming. These two characters would be handling raw chicken guts and other foods and objects at the same time. To avoid cross-contamination on set, Melissa created edible and safe chicken guts out of carefully disguised food. While sausage casings made sense for the intestines, meat can easily go bad during long shoot days. So instead, she filled collagen casings with bean curd. Chicken blood is also more yellow, so she dyed her ingredients yellow and then switched to pink as the intestines grew pinker the further down they go. It's important to use foods that can take many different shapes and sizes. For example, Melissa would use ramen or glass noodles here over spaghetti as they are more pliable.
It takes on different shapes than spaghetti does. It also has different edges to it, where spaghetti is like totally round. This is probably more like a linguine.
Then, by dyeing these turnips different colors, they could stand in for both the heart and the liver. On top of all that, you can see cherry tomatoes and kumquats. This is the kind of detail that could only come from the close eye of a food stylist.
So while I was doing my research, I found a few pictures of hens that actually had unlaid eggs inside their cavity. And they basically look like a very, very orange organic egg yolk.
If Melissa can't find a specific food that can stand in for something else, she'll have to make her edible props from scratch. Like in this scene from the Netflix series Daybreak, where Ms. Crumble eats a handful of live maggots pulled from the trash. In this shot, you see actual live maggots who were on set with their wrangler and had to be kept safe. So in this shot, the maggot actors were swapped for fake gummy maggots.
I mean, I know they're fake, but I mean, they look exactly like maggots, so there's a part of me that's just like, ugh. You know, like, especially like when I look down the bowl, you got a couple like stuck to the side there.
To get the correct form, Melissa started off with a mold of plastic grubs that she found at a bait and tackle store.
And they were very, very close in like size and shape, and they had the same ribbing as a little maggot.
She filled the mold with gelatin, which made them naturally wiggly. More movement can be added based on how you hold a bowl full of them.
Oh, like, so it's just, they kind of start cascading down or whatever?
Yeah.
Even though they were so tiny, they couldn't be uniform in color.
Over the course of the life of a maggot, they change colors. So when you actually see the maggots in Daybreak, you'll see that there's a range going from translucent to white and then leaning in towards a beige and then to a brown.
First, she added coconut pudding, followed by caramel coloring and almond milk to make them darker as they aged.
Wait, let me also act like I'm actually eating maggots. Oh, if I was like Fear Factor or something. Yeah, these taste great. Have you guys had these? They're like fruit snacks.
The little details Melissa had to get right in each maggot pale in comparison to the cockroach from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Edible props are frequently shown in close-up form, meaning Melissa couldn't get away with using a date on its own. It also needed legs, antennae, wings, and a head. Chili threads replicated floppy antennae, and dry seaweed was sturdy enough for its legs. As for the body, Melissa sorted through an entire container of dates.
The first thing that I look at is the size, and to make sure that it's not too big or too small for the final cockroach. The second thing that I look for is that they're not too wrinkled, they're not too shriveled. Some of them are too broken up to actually use, since the wings need to be all one piece and look like they're attached. The reason that I picked these 3 dates to start with is they're all about the same uniform size, and the skins are perfectly intact.
This allowed her to fillet and flatten the dates, as she noticed that roaches are typically flatter than that of average dates.
So taking out as much of the meat in the back part of the date as I can, and then that leaves the wings separate and hollow. And then the second date that we choose is the one that I use for the head. I usually look for ones that have a little smaller and pointed top, and that are a little bit darker than the actual cockroach body we've chosen.
Meanwhile, the natural stickiness of the dates acted as a glue when piecing the two together. Making sure everything fit together was why choosing the exact right pieces of seaweed was so crucial.
It's just looking for ones that have a slight curve to it so that they can actually fit into the body and leave the legs straight.
The monotonous task of choosing the right strands pays off on camera. In the final shot, the flexible chili threads naturally move with the wind like real antennae would. Plus, they add the crunch missing from the date.
It's so nice, I don't want to ruin it, but gotta do it. The seaweed also gives it a surprise, like, salty fishiness to it. So even that, the reaction was a bit authentic, because I was like, well, I know what dates taste like. And then when I heard the salty, fishy taste of seaweed, I'm like, uh-oh.
It's these minute details that make the most convincing edible props and get the best reactions. For Judy Moody and the Not Bomber Summer, Melissa created edible pieces of Bigfoot's poop, which the characters accidentally eat. Using peanut butter and chocolate for color and texture seems obvious, but there's more than meets the eye.
The nuts are a nice touch.
Well, it's not just poop, it's Bigfoot poop. So we have to assume Bigfoot lives in the woods and
Yeah.
eats nuts and berries.
I figured his poop would have been a little bit bigger. Also would have accepted corn. Oh yeah. It's like a brownie. It is a brownie, right?
Kind of like.
This is the lab, basically, where we do all of our mixing and potioning. So as you can probably tell, we've mixed a few batches of blood on this counter, but I can take you through a batch if you like. Most of your run-of-the-mill bloods start off with corn syrup. You know, it gives it a little viscosity. If it was going to be our regular everyday blood, we'd put some soap in it because that helps it clean up.
Oh, really?
Like when you get it in your wardrobe or something, it helps it wash out. If you were to just put color in here right now, it would kind of come out looking like cherry cough syrup because blood is a little opaque. It's not completely see-through. So we add an opacifier to it to make it opaque before we start to color it. So basically what you get is kind of this white looking slurry. Then you can start to color it. We go through a lot of food coloring. Obviously the base is red. Now, you're never really gonna get to a really realistic blood red with just red food color. So what we do is we add a little blue or black, and then that gives us a little depth. So now, you know, it looks more like your classic blood.
Wow.
Now we can take this and take it out here and do a little something with it if you like. So we can do the, you know, maybe a blood spray and maybe the, you know, the classic blow out the back of your head on the wall kind of thing if you want.
Yeah, sure.
For this, like sometimes, you know, you'd hide them behind somebody and then, you know, at the moment where they get shot in the head, then splat against the wall.
3, 2, 1.
Now, if we do more pressure, then it's a little more violent.
Right. Okay. Yeah, go for it.
3, 2, 1.
No! Wow. That is brutal.
Have you ever been watching something on TV and thought, hey, where'd that dead body come from? How does it look so real? And how did it fall off that tall building? We went to Dapper Cadaver in Los Angeles to learn how they make fake bodies and body parts for TV and movies. Dapper Cadaver bills itself as a death-related prop house and prop fabrication shop.
If it's dead or can die, we can make it.
This is BJ and Eileen Winslow, co-owners of the prop house. Their work has appeared in many different movies and TV shows. They showed us how their fake bodies are made and how they give them such realistic injuries. We also put one of their creations to the ultimate test.
A loose testicle here, right?
Yeah, that's an eyeball.
No, I think it's a testicle.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Most of their bodies are made in these giant molds. They pour the materials, usually polyfoam, into a mold. Hard to believe that this becomes this. They have molds for just about any kind of project that gets thrown their way. Whichever mold they decide to use depends on the project they're working on. They even have a pig-shaped one in a butcher shop display. They also specialize in organs, which might appear in an autopsy scene. Then, they just pop right out of the mold. Soon, they'll be painted and detailed. The heads are typically life cast from actual people, but are often resculpted and given new features over time. When working with clients, sometimes they'll get a photo of an actor or a sketch to help make the model, but most of the time, they have to work completely from scratch.
Once we start changing hair and beard and skin color, like those guys can really just completely transform from looking like nobody in particular to looking like two completely different people.
And you see an arm painted flesh tone with no shading on it, it looks like a rubber arm that you would see in a Halloween shop.
They have bodies of all shapes and sizes, like a baby made out of silicone. The material allows it to be more flexible and more detailed.
This feels like a baby. I mean, it's not as warm, but like about the weight of a baby.
Not all fake bodies are made in the same way.
So this is our Lucy body. She's what we call a half anatomical, which that means that she's life cast from the waist up, and then she is a posable dummy body from the waist down. And that gives her, you know, a high degree of both detail and flexibility.
You know, for real, it's a sharp shirt.
He's not like the silicone. You're going to want to move it to bend the wire. There you go.
Besides dressing them, there's still a lot more they have to do with these bodies to make them look realistic. You've got to be imaginative with your injuries. This body was made to look like it succumbed to frostbite. This one got impaled, and this one is just a head.
I refer to science books and anatomy books, police photography, and just like anything that can give me a realistic understanding of, you know, anatomy and the processes that we're working with.
We both have an appreciation and love of science. When BJ went to college, both of us started out as biology majors. He started out in biology, I started out in biophysics, but it's funny because both of us then ended up in writing degrees over our college time, and so these days we really get to marry our love of both biology and storytelling.
They're especially good at making a body look burned. Some of their charred bodies popped up in The Revenant. They demonstrated this technique for us using just an arm. They add layers of paint and spray paint.
And what happens on top of the burn is that your skin gets, you know, crispy, wrinkly, starts to, you know, deglove from the hand itself. So to represent that, we're just using ordinary shrink wrap.
Then, they cover it in an ashy-looking burn mud. After that, they use a heat gun to shrink the shrink wrap. That's when the details really come out.
This looks incredible. Look at the detail on this.
We couldn't leave Dapper Cadaver without seeing one of these bodies in action. They were kind enough to throw a stunt body off a 14-foot tall roof for us. Bodies used for these purposes are usually made from a strong Dura rubber and filled with foam or another kind of stuffing and covered with a fabric material. This makes the bodies both impact and tear resistant.
This particular model is designed to have some type of swinging arm motion.
But could it survive the fall? That was cool. Let's try that again.
How's it look?
Just the tiniest bit off the nose on impact. Everything else is perfect.
One of these $100 bills is real, and the other one is a piece of prop money made for movies. Can you tell which one is which? They both have a blue security ribbon, textured ink, and even the smallest detail. like text from the Declaration of Independence? The answer is obvious when you flip them over. Bills as detailed as this one are required to be blank on the other side. That's because if prop makers like Prop Movie Money in Florida print money that looks too real, they risk getting in trouble with the US government. That's what happened 20 years ago on the set of Rush Hour 2.
Money is more work than it's worth in the long run.
That's Greg Bilson Jr., CEO of the Los Angeles-based ISS Props, one of the biggest prop houses in the world. In 2000, Greg got an order for and printed $1 trillion of prop money for Rush Hour 2, most of which was going to be blown up on screen. And the prop money looks good in this scene. Too good, in fact.
Hello, Benjamin.
The fake money looked so real that some extras on set pocketed some of it and tried to spend it at real stores. That alerted the US Secret Service, which confiscated and destroyed the fake bills and the digital files used to print them. It had cost $100,000 to print all of that fake money, so losing all of it was a financial blow to Greg and ISS.
We didn't try to make fake money to dupe the public. We made fake money to make a movie, but we just made the prop too good.
The Rush Hour 2 incident underscored an obvious dilemma for printing fake money. The money needs to look realistic on camera, but it can't look too realistic up close, or people might try to spend it in real life. The problem has become even greater in recent years, with better cameras capturing more and more details from the background of scenes. So the prop industry has come up with two different types of prop money, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. For scenes where the cash is filmed from far away, productions typically use standard grade bills. The iconic money scene from Breaking Bad uses these bills, which were rented from Greg and ISS. These bills look real from afar, but up close are obviously fake, with lots of clear differences when compared to the real thing. The portrait on the bill is poor quality compared to the real one, and instead of $100, it just reads 100. The smaller details on the bill are also altered. The seals are a different design, and the signatures on the bill have been changed. Then, there are the obvious additions like the prominently displayed for motion picture use only. In fact, if you zoom in to this scene from Breaking Bad, while it's blurry, you can actually see that each bill says for motion picture use only. These changes should keep the Secret Service away, but they also mean standard fake bills are no good for close-ups. So for those shots, movies will often use high-grade bills. High-grade bills are identical to real money, but are printed on only one side, so that they can't be confused with the real thing, like the one we showed you earlier, which was printed by RJR Props in Atlanta. You can see an example of a high-grade bill in this scene from the 2014 movie Let's Be Cops. An alternate solution that Greg and ISS have been using for the past several years is to simply use real bills. This is the first version that they offer. ISS will take a pile of completely blank bill notes and then place one real bill on the top of the stack and one on the bottom, making it appear as if the entire stack is full of real bills. The second method for using real dollars has a bigger risk attached, but it may be the best option. An entire stack of real bills. ISS will get stacks of $10,000 from the bank and then deliver them to set. While having this much cash lying around makes some productions nervous, it looks great on film and eliminates any risk with the Secret Service. That's what they did in this shot from Ozark.
I see fake money used all the time, and I think it is appalling because I'm a property master and I want things to be authentic and accurate and look right.
Take a look at this season 1 episode of Girlfriends. The fake-looking money is distracting to the audience. While productions may prefer to use real money, sometimes it's unavoidable, like in scenes where bills are destroyed, or in scenes that require an absurd quantity. In cases like these, Greg says that he will still use fake money, except he certainly doesn't print the fake money himself, as he still has his cease and desist from the Secret Service. So he buys it from Prop Movie Money, one of the few printers that make prop money. The ultimate irony of printing prop money is that it actually isn't very profitable. Standard and high-grade bills sell for roughly $45 for a stack of 100 bills. Greg still has 2 bills from Rush Hour 2 that the Secret Service didn't confiscate. Even though these bills look less realistic than modern prop bills, he still has them encased in plastic so that no one can try to use them in real life. They're a physical reminder of the risks prop makers take and the rewards they reap to get that perfect money shot.
What do The Exorcist, Stand By Me, Blockers, and Big Little Lies have in common? A vomit scene. For every disgusting vomit scene in a movie, there's an effects team that actually had to make the stuff, and an actor who had to sell it.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben. Today I'm heading to NYSPFX in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and I'm gonna see how fake puke is made for movies and TV. And I couldn't be more excited because I'm gonna get to try some of it myself. Grab a snack. You might not wanna eat while you watch this.
This is Mike Myers, a special effects artist and the founder of NYSPFX. Myers and his team created some of the coolest practical effects for the Batman prequel show Gotham and can do everything from breakaway glass to fake blood. But today is all about the puke, which Myers executed flawlessly in the 2015 film While We're Young.
Watch the carpet.
Fake vomit comes in all shapes, sizes, and textures. It can be made to look realistic or exaggerated, depending on the scene and genre. In While We're Young, they used a combination of potato leek and split pea soup.
We're attempting today top ramen to give that squiggly, soft noodle projectile nastiness to hopefully stick to someone's lip when they're done. Today we have some frozen berries that we're gonna mix up.
All right, so here comes the tomato paste.
Yum.
A little thickener, a little color.
Yep. So we have tomato paste. Oh, that just splashed all over me. Perfect.
Yeah, splash down.
Yeah. Look how good that looks. This looks very familiar to me, but not too familiar.
For this experiment, we used 3 different types of puke.
So we got our first fake puke right there. That's peas and water. And then this was a nice mix of ramen water and tomato paste. And so now we've got berries, right? Third one is gonna have berries and water.
Just water, yeah.
Great. This is definitely the kind of fake vomit that's gonna stain my clothing.
Yes, for sure.
But I anticipated that, so I wore my jeans that have pizza on them already, so.
Once we had the mixtures, it was time to load them into the tubes. Now, this stage is actually just as important to making convincing fake puke as the actor who has to sell the scene.
The pumps that we utilize are made for liquids, not vomit, thick, pasty substances. We use our main liquid as our propellant, and then in the vertical tubes on the pumping, incorporate the thicker paste that will then be pushed upward and outward first.
The mixture also needed to be this texture for another reason. Realism. The medium density, thick part of the mixture will be fed into the top of the tubes, and the rest that comes out will be more like liquid, which Myers says follows the pattern of real-life vomit.
Yeah, that looks really gross.
I needed a little acting advice first.
When they have to regurgitate and project, there does have to be some body motion involved, but it pretty much has to say, if there's my hose and if I'm regurgitating, I can't go up because then my hose is coming out of my mouth. So he has to know to only go forward and open his mouth wide and keep his mouth open, because if he closes his mouth, the vomit's still coming out. What a wasted take that is.
Okay, we're gonna do this whole bucket.
Yeah, that's about 8 gallons worth of
That's a lot. We'll just
chum.
This is probably the chunkiest mixture, and there was going to be a lot of it.
3, 2, 1. 1 100, 2. Another one. 3, 2, 1. 1 100, 2. I think getting the timing right is like the first initial challenge. You hear it coming up, and so like as long as you're just kind of like, you know, ready to go, then you're good to go.
The pea soup mixture is different for several reasons. It's mixed with a lot of water, making it a lot more liquidy. And for this, they instead use a pressure pot with clear tubes attached.
I'm like the guy in the group project that doesn't help,
Oh, man.
but still gets an A anyways.
Great. This hose allows you the flexibility where you're not rigid.
Okay, cool.
So because you have a guy behind you, you can go left, right, up, down, turn to that camera and splash it.
Cool. Let's try a little bit of everything. Do you want me to puke on you? You can hear you puke. That way?
And you said that it's going to dribble down my lip?
Once we shut it off, it'll dribble, dribble, dribble.
Great, cool.
And that gives some authenticity because it's also got a deflector in the front that's going to spray.
Ooh, sweet. This works well for a scene involving out-of-control vomiting.
I want to watch out, Nick.
One piece of advice I would give: aim away from the camera.
I am covered in fake puke, and I'm not the only one.
For some types of puke, no rigs or hoses are required.
Of Facebook and reality. Oh, God! Oh, my God. It's the shrimp.
For a spit take, a member of the effects team would scoop a little bit of fake puke up.
Oop, that seems like a lot.
The actor would then take some into their mouth and spit it up.
Like that?
Yeah.
How did that look, guys?
That looks great.
Should I do some more?
How'd it taste?
Actually, really good.
There's always room for a little improvement.
Are there any tips you can give me for how to improve my performance?
Well, a good thing to do is just a little more retching, a little shoulder movement, and a little try to sell it a little more. And even if put your hand in front and get a little bit more, you know, separate where it's coming from, maybe a little bit coming down on yourself.
All right, no problem.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in the most control. I could kind of, obviously I could time it myself. I didn't have to time it up with the rig or anything like that, which I think allowed me to get more into my performance. Love berries, so that spit take is the one for me.
And with no tubes to cover up, nor massive sprays to avoid, the camera can look straight onto the actor. However, there are many ways to hide these pesky tubes. Sometimes they're simply taken out in post-production. Other times, it's all about where you place the camera. And while CGI is used to aid the process, fake vomit scenes are still largely done practically. More work than you can imagine goes into creating something that, in the end, might just be on screen for a couple of seconds, but can still be the most memorable moment of any given movie or TV show.
This is a dish from the movie Midsommar.
I was most excited for you to come.
You might think that bright yellow center you see is an egg yolk, but it isn't. See, over the course of a 10 to 12 hour filming day, egg yolks tend to dry out and change color. So Zoe Hegedüsch came up with the idea to top some of the plates with edible spheres made of orange and mango instead. That's a day in the life of a Hollywood food stylist. When food is involved, and it's involved in movies a lot, food stylists have to figure out how to make the food pop on screen no matter what hurdles are thrown at them. They're the movie's biggest problem solvers you never think about. The first thing a food stylist needs is to be prepared to make a lot of food for a lot of takes. For this scene in The Amazing Spider-Man, the food stylist cooked 90 branzinos, and the food stylist for 2014's Chef made 800 Cubano sandwiches. Zoe baked over 100 pies, prepared about 50 fake yolks, and plated 200 real yolks for Midsommar, a horror film that takes place at the height of the Swedish Midsummer Festival. It's a celebration, so naturally, there were a ton of food requirements.
Directors, they prefer not using fake things on movies. It's really important for them to use real food.
So I always try like do everything real.
These little butter churches were actually made out of plaster and are one of the few fake food items audiences saw in Midsommar. If you're using real food, you have to make sure it tastes fresh. One of the first problems Zoe had to solve was what to do with the meat pies, which had to be edible for this shot. The movie was filmed in Hungary during the late summer months of 2018, one of the hottest summers on record in the country, so keeping a pie filled with meat out in the sun for a 12-hour shoot and then asking actor Jack Rayner to take multiple big bites for multiple takes wouldn't go well, and there needed to be something inside the pie.
You can't make the same size and texture with an empty pie. For example, this shape wouldn't stay if it would be empty.
The solution? A filling of oatmeal mixed with cocoa powder, which is going to last a lot longer out in the sun. Oatmeal mimicked the texture of ground meat, and the powder mimicked the color.
Oatmeal is a really, really good ingredient to use on set and on camera because you can shape it and like color it with like edible ingredients and make something also that is tasty.
She had to get even more creative for what would be the toughest challenge of the entire movie. That dish with the egg yolk in the center, called the sun's eye. Both the specificity of the ingredients and the sheer amount made this dish a huge challenge to bring to life.
It's supposed to have pickled herring in it, but we didn't put it because it wouldn't really change the look of the dish, but it would have been impossible to use herring on that day with the heat and like the smell.
That intense heat not only dried out the yolks, but it caused some of them to burst out on the first go-around. That meant Zoe and her team had to change the dishes out every 15 minutes. On top of that, some of the cast was allergic to eggs, so Zoe had to completely rethink the center of the dish. Instead of using yolks, she made those mango and orange edible spheres. She put the frozen mixture into a sodium alginate solution where a thin membrane formed to give it the right texture. Put it next to a real egg, and you can barely spot the difference. One challenge for any movie is keeping food that's been sitting out looking fresh. So Zoe relied on some tried and true tricks of the trade. She sprayed potatoes with cooking spray to make them look like they were fresh out of the oven. She mixed water and oil to top the egg yolk dish, which not only made it look fresher and tastier for longer, but also added some weight to the chives, which kept getting swept away in the wind. But there's a risk of going too overboard. Cooking spray looks perfect on potatoes, but if she used corn syrup instead, it would have looked too shiny. In addition, she sprayed the apples with only a couple spritzes of water. Any more, and they might start looking fake.
It's like just because you see some water drops in something, you can feel that freshness.
And speaking of apples, there are a ton of them lingering in the background of Midsommar. You might have noticed them in the kitchen as Danny baked pies. Even this background item had to be vetted, and it wasn't as easy as picking apples up from a store. They had to look like they were grown in the commune.
So it was important to see that the apples are grown really close because it's important to show that they have it in the community where they live, and it wasn't just bought somewhere in the supermarket.
The perfect apples for this scene actually needed to look imperfect, like they were just plucked right off a tree. So half of them are from a nearby farmer's market, and the other half were literally plucked off trees.
You can see it's smaller, you see some like ugly dots on it also.
The most elaborate project Zoe and her team worked on was the May Queen Feast. They had some freedom in designing the display, but still had to follow some important rules. Everything needed to look rustic, it needed to be traditionally Swedish, and it needed to feel like it was grown locally. So there was a lot of trial and error. One cake Zoe made was rejected because it looked too modern, but this Hargaman pie, shaped like a man lying in apples, met the specifications and made the cut. So did this dish made with a goat carcass, which likely would have come from their farm. The team also did a lot of background research, like reading Nordic cookbooks, to make sure everything they used was part of Scandinavian cuisine. Their findings showed up on the table. They found that asparagus was used for special occasions in Sweden, so they built this asparagus tower. which took them up to 5 hours to construct. In the movie version, the base is made up of meatballs, which helped it pass the rustic test. Crayfish-centered parties are a Swedish tradition, and the crustacean would likely be something the commune would find around them. So the food styling team spent around 6 hours building this elaborate crayfish tower. Since these displays were meant to be consumed by the actors, freshness was less of an issue. However, as with the sun's eye plates, the vegetables would dry out in the sun, so Zoe changed pieces out as frequently as possible. Something most chefs don't have to think about is how their food will be filmed. Zoe knew there would be a lot of shots from high above, so she made sure every single display was really big and really colorful. But what happens when there is a piece of food you need and it isn't even available in the country you're filming in? The movie needed a fresh herring for this scene where Danny attempts to eat one whole. This moment was specifically built into the script.
It's tradition for good luck. What?
Herring is incredibly abundant in Sweden, but the movie was filmed in Hungary.
In Sweden, you go to every market and you just find a herring, but like in Hungary, I went like all the markets, all the shops, and I found like smoked ones, like pickled ones, but without head, or it was too small, or it was too big, or it was just not good for the movie. So at the end, the herring had to be shipped from France.
They got 20 pieces shipped to them. They were shipped at the last minute, and the team had little room for failure. The most important thing for the scene was that actress Florence Pugh was comfortable. So Zoe took 10 herrings and cut and prepared the fish in multiple styles to give Florence and the filmmakers options. In the end, they landed on a fish that was boneless, but still had its head and tail. They were able to get the perfect take after 7 or 8 tries. So, why didn't Zoe make her life easier and get a fish she found in Hungary? Or just have the art department make a fake fish that met the scene's needs? Because, without that real fish, you wouldn't have gotten that authentically horrified look on Florence Pugh's face. And that's when going the extra mile for your food in a movie makes it all worth it.
In Ready or Not, Samara Weaving plays the lead role, a young bride named Grace who takes part in a deadly game of hide and seek with her new husband's family. But one of the other big stars in the film is actually her transforming wedding dress, which goes from this to this.
It's its own character in the movie, really.
That's costume designer Avery Plewis, who had to design 24 complex, ever-evolving dresses, despite the fact that the audience only ever seems to see one dress on screen. But first, what does a costume designer actually do?
Basically, you take the blueprint of the script and attach a visual identity to each character based on what's on the page and the director's vision.
This is accomplished using things like color composition and breakdowns of their clothing. For Ready or Not, the dress was supposed to symbolize Grace's journey, from her happy wedding day to the brutal, bloody ending. And this was no easy task. Of the 24 dresses used in the production, 17 were worn by Samara, and the other 7 were worn by her stunt double. So why so many? Well, the dress evolves throughout the film and goes through a series of 5 stages based on the various things that happen to her. On top of that, each stage required at least 3 multiples of each dress to shoot different takes. As co-director Matt Bettinelli-Olpin puts it, the dress, like the story, starts grand and classical before it degrades and degrades.
A good example for me of what I was looking at cinematically was Die Hard, and how Bruce Willis's tank top becomes just trashed. While it's not a wedding gown, it was sort of the same progression of breakdown that we were going for.
That's a lot of costume changes and continuity to be aware of, which required a lot of planning.
I made a flow chart, like a spreadsheet. That's the other thing about costume design that a lot of people don't realize. It's very, very creative, but it's also very technical and a lot of logistics.
And she worked backwards to nail down the final designs, using the script as a guide. Let's take a look at the various stages of transformation. And warning, some minor plot spoilers ahead if you haven't seen the movie. This is the original dress you see at the beginning of the film. It's pure white, untouched, and includes a veil. The look was inspired by Kate Middleton's wedding dress. While it may look like one piece, the dress is actually made up of 5 separate pieces: a lace top, a corset, a skirt liner, and a silk sash.
And I did that on purpose so that when we were on set and they had limited time but wanted to do several takes, we could just throw a different skirt on her or throw a different top on her, and it would make the process faster.
Here's the progression of some of the key changes to the hero dress. Early on in the film, Grace's dress gets caught on the dumbwaiter, and she tears the fabric, transforming the gown into a skirt. This piece was made from a fabric called tulle.
Tulle is really easy to rip and also looks really beautiful when it's ripped. And the dirtier and sort of more messed up it gets, the more interesting it looks.
Lace was chosen for the top because of the way the blood would look on the material. This is also when we see her add some ammunition and a gun to her look, which can be seen in the movie posters. Now that the dress was shorter and it was easier to run from her murderous family, things started to get a lot darker. Literally.
Then she runs and falls into the goat carcass world, which then we dyed her dresses a hair darker, which most people can't really tell, but that was actually a story point to show sort of an arc in what happens to her.
5 multiples of the same tea-stained yellow dress were used in this stage. One of the scenes involved harness work, which required special alterations.
After she's harnessed, we obviously can't use that dress again because it's got holes and spots where they're going to visual effects out the harness wires or whatever. And also, those dresses are usually made a size bigger to accommodate the harnessing.
She also gets shot in her hand, which leads to her tearing a sleeve off the lace top and using it to bandage her wounds. Anytime she has to tear the dress, as with the skirt scene we mentioned earlier, the material is pre-cut and stitched back on so it tears easily.
We pre-rigged it. Samara is like a very strong woman, but there's no way she would have been able to rip that off.
Basically, the dress was created to be destroyed. Grace's dress gradually gets dirtier and bloodier as she fights back against the family. Various new cuts and tears happen at this stage, like when she squeezes through the fence. The lace top is sliced along the back, and another piece of the skirt is pulled off. She also removes the silk sash and uses it as a weapon. So the dress isn't just a visual representation of her character, it's also functional. By the end of the film, Grace becomes completely drenched in blood. So the color changes once again, this time from yellow to pure red.
The dress that she is covered in blood in was sort of one of her dirtiest dresses that we had kind of destroyed, that we had a couple versions of. We just went full Carrie and dumped blood all over her. We didn't pre-bloody it or anything.
One of the biggest challenges when doing this many costume changes is continuity.
You have all these things that happen to her continuously, and so tracking the continuity is extremely tough.
But the final stage, when the dress is already badly damaged and covered in blood, was actually the easiest, because it's more difficult for the viewer to notice subtle changes. While both the character and the dress go through a pretty horrific ordeal in the film, it has already inspired one bride, who reached out to Avery to see if she could wear the dress in her actual wedding.
I'm kind of hoping that I see people doing cosplay Ready or Not weddings. I think that would be pretty cool.
In a recent episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David holds up a pack of cigarettes, specifically Morley cigarettes. Now, let's rewind back to 1960 and the Alfred Hitchcock classic Psycho. Take a look at the cigarettes the psychiatrist is smoking in the final scene of the film. Look familiar? Morleys have appeared in hundreds of TV shows and movies throughout the last century, in everything from The Twilight Zone to Seinfeld. And to be clear, Morleys are not a real cigarette brand. So, what exactly is going on here? Is this some deep, secret, connected cinematic universe that ties Norman Bates to George Costanza? If you pay really close attention to shows and movies, you'll start to notice many of the same objects over and over again. Like this newspaper. There are several fake brands that cross over into other works, including Acme, Oceanic Air, and Heisler Beer. But one of the most reused brands is Morley.
Morley Cigarettes is the most prominent brand of fictional cigarettes that has been used for the past 60 years in films, television shows, and video games.
Jonathan Kuntz says they come from a company in Sun Valley, California.
The Earl Hayes Press is a 100-year-old prop house that supplies fake brand props to Hollywood, and they are the main suppliers of Morley cigarettes.
According to its website, Earl Hayes Press pretty much sells fake everything, from chips and beer to magazines and license plates. Morley's design is based on the most popular real cigarette brand in the United States, Marlboro, with its signature red and white packaging.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
Marlboros are often nicknamed Marleys, hence the fake name Morley. Earl Hayes Press sells Morleys in a few different varieties, including Morley Lights, as you can see here. But to understand why Morley even exists in the first place, we have to go back and take a look at the love-hate relationship between tobacco companies and Hollywood.
What's that? Winston cigarettes. Try one, Granny. They's first rate.
In the 1950s, you mostly had sponsors for TV and radio, where the advertising agencies paid for and produced the show. The characters even used the same products. And many of these early advertisers were, you guessed it, tobacco companies. I Love Lucy was famously sponsored by Philip Morris. So you would see brand integrations like this.
Have you tried a Philip Morris lately?
You'll love them. They're so smooth and mild, and they taste so good.
Movies were also typically cross-promoted with tobacco companies. Here's Joan Crawford, for example, smoking Chesterfield cigarettes in a poster promoting her film Flamingo Road. If a show wasn't sponsored, it would use a fake brand instead, since it wasn't getting paid to show the real brand. Enter Morley. This fake brand can be traced all the way back to episodes of Perry Mason and one of the most memorable horror movies of all time, Psycho. Although the box shows an earlier white design, as opposed to the newer red and white version.
And I think this is what really started the Morley cigarettes craze.
Morley's popped up in TV shows like Naked City and The Twilight Zone, most famously Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, with William Shatner lighting up a Morley on a plane. But Morleys weren't used as much during the 1970s and 1980s. Why? For one, the 1970 Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act banned cigarette ads from airing on television and radio. This was part of a big push to stop smoking in TV shows, and the appearance of cigarettes on TV decreased in general around this time by about 70%. Tobacco companies turned to movies instead, paying big bucks to have their cigarettes appear in popular films throughout the 80s. So there wasn't much of a need for fake brands like Morley in movies either. But this all changed again in 1998 with what's known as the Master Settlement Agreement, which banned tobacco advertising in both films and TV, paving the way for the fake brand's triumphant return.
The real explosion of Morley cigarettes in popularity in pop culture comes at the end of the 1990s in The X-Files.
Well, you'll be interested to know that Morley Tobacco has subpoenaed all of our files on the case.
In the show, the cigarette-smoking man is a villainous character played by William Davis. He famously smoked Morleys, and the fake tobacco company was actually incorporated into the plot in the episode called Brand X. Something you couldn't do very easily with a real brand, but more on that in a bit. Following the X-Files, Morleys started showing up everywhere, even in video games and music videos.
It has literally appeared in hundreds of movies and television shows.
Here's George smoking a pack in Seinfeld, and Chandler holding a pack in an episode of Friends. They're also found in Justified and the 2019 Breaking Bad movie El Camino. Shows technically have the freedom to show real brands these days for historical realism, as long as it's not a paid ad.
Lucky Strikes is toasted.
So why would they opt for a made-up brand from the 60s? Well, real brands are a big risk.
There are several reasons why film and TV producers would avoid using real brand names without permission. There is a little bit of legal jeopardy. If your product is used to kill somebody or is defamed in any way, you might be subject to lawsuits.
A study found that villains are the ones who are typically depicted smoking in films and TV, and brands likely do not want their image associated with criminals. Apple, for instance, reportedly doesn't let villains use its products in movies. Real products are typically covered up or disguised when used in shows or movies. In the 1930s and 40s, the brand letters on cars and films were carefully removed.
Hollywood was quite careful to keep brand names out of their films. They didn't want to be associated with any particular product line, and they didn't want to offend the people that were using a rival product.
So these days, Morley's are mainly used as the replacement brand. An inside joke, similar to those 555 phone numbers and the Wilhelm scream.
Morley cigarettes have become almost like a meme on the web, something where you can kind of wink your eye at the audience and say, you know, we know that this is really a movie or a television show, and we're just kind of playing with things.
Can I see your ID?
Yeah, I think I have it.
This might be the most famous fake ID in any movie. So famous that someone tried to use it as a fake ID in real life. That's why prop makers have to be extra careful when making fake IDs for movies and TV shows. Too good, and they could get into legal trouble. We stopped by the hand prop room in LA, which made the McLovin ID, and the studio of graphic props artist Ross McDonald, to see how Hollywood makes its prop IDs. When creating fake IDs for production, agencies might limit their customers to major studios. It's the prop maker's job to make these IDs look as real as possible on screen without crossing into any legal gray areas. Like with this New Mexico's driver's license, which the hand prop room made for Black Widow. The photo of Scarlett Johansson has been swapped in for a stock photo, and the hologram, which in real IDs would be 3D, is actually 2D.
There's a lot of tricks that you can use in the graphic itself to make it look like it's catching light and having some shine to it.
For a special close-up, they might simulate the hologram physically using a silk screen and iridescent powders mixed with clear ink. Luckily, according to graphic props artist Ross McDonald, simplifying elements like holograms and shadow images can make the ID look better on screen, since it won't be as jammed with tiny details.
The rule of thumb is convincing is better than accurate.
To nail the aesthetics, prop makers often focus on the sheen of the ID.
A lot of the driver's licenses you see, especially now, have this kind of matte but also a bit of a sheen look, and that's what we're going to get from the lamination process.
Laminating will also give it the weight of an actual driver's license, so that when the actor holds the card, it not only looks but feels like the real deal. For projects that call for close-ups, they use this old-school embossing machine to make sure the lighting reflects off the numbers on the card in the right way. And for special forms of ID, like those for the US Army, the prop makers might have to mimic metal chips. For these, prop artists can make fake chips out of vinyl to stick on top of the ID, or they can print it on a card that already has the fake chip built in. But specialized IDs pose another problem.
They're often very, very plain. Military ID cards, police identification, even the FBI identification. They're meant to be looked at really close up, but on a TV screen, they might be sort of holding it up and we're looking at them from 8 feet away.
As a prop artist, you'd maybe spice things up with a flashy gold badge, or this type of giant FBI logo you see popping up a lot in shows and movies.
And a lot of times the frame of reference that viewers have is other shows. The X-Files one is one that you see copied a lot.
The ID also needs to play well in the scene.
FBI.
Like this 1920s one Ross made for a Prohibition agent in Boardwalk Empire. He first produced an ID faithful to what agents carried at the time. But after some rehearsals, the filmmakers asked him to add space for a badge inside, so the agents would have something to flash. Things get tricky when it comes to passports, which are generally much harder to forge than ID cards because of all the detail involved across multiple pages. To make a current US passport, the hand prop room has to print and trim the pages, do a clear overlay on the photo page, and silk screen the cover to give it that authentic sheen. After sewing the pages together, the prop makers assemble the passport and do a final trim. To avoid legal troubles, prop houses will sometimes deliberately alter the look. Like on this Netherlands passport for Madam Secretary. The show's legal team asked the hand prop room to make the passport less accurate by reshuffling the layout and changing the color scheme. With historical IDs, legality isn't an issue, so prop artists can get a lot more authentic on period shows. That's what Ross did when he made this 1920s passport for Steve Buscemi's character on Boardwalk Empire.
Passport?
Ross first had to track down a 1921 passport to use as a model, then digitally clear out the existing info and recreate the background pattern so that he could go in and write the new material on top. He had to find the red legal seal in Europe, since the US doesn't use that kind anymore, then emboss the seal and photo, make, print, and perforate the stick-on stamps, and recreate all the rubber stamps to match those of the time period. He was lucky to have an example to work with. It can be a lot harder to find reference material for more mundane forms of ID, like a driver's license from a specific year and state.
Especially from pre-1980, there's no reason for anyone to digitize that.
For this one, the closest reference Ross could find was a photo of a New Jersey license from 1923. He scanned it and built all this type on top of it in the computer to recreate a high-res version. Since this stuff is so hard to find, Ross keeps folders of all the reference materials he's compiled through the 100+ movies he's worked on. When he's working off a pixelated photo like this one, the hardest part is recreating the actual document part of the ID. Ross has to identify all the typeface, so he places different fonts over the original text to find ones that match. It helps to have a library of antique fonts used in different time periods.
You can date this particular cutting of this font to between 1815 and roughly 1825.
Sometimes, though, you have to recreate a whole alphabet. For this 1960 passport made for an unreleased project, Jacob scanned 6 or 7 real passports from the era to capture every letter of the alphabet, then cleaned up the letters and vectorized them to make a whole new font just for this particular year of passports. His team also had to recreate by hand the blue to red effect of this special 60s stamp. Replicating the look of old printing tools takes some creative problem solving. The hand prop room used printing tricks on the 67 California license for Chris Pine's character in I Am the Night to make the text look like it came out of a typewriter. Whenever possible, it helps to use the real deal. Ross prints all kinds of seals and typefaces on his old school letterpress, which is operated by a foot pedal. Then there's the question of what to write. Ross made these Illinois licenses for a scene where the police raid a packed speakeasy, which meant a bunch of background characters needed to show ID. So Ross had to make up a bunch of names, addresses, exact heights, weights, and more.
After about the 10th one, you're like, did I use John Smith already?
Ross will often refer to period yearbooks for names that sound old school.
This guy's Aloysius Sawicki.
And for main characters, all this info needs to be confirmed with production. These are passport instructions for Owen Sleater in Boardwalk Empire, providing details like the character's full name and hair color, but leaving out other pertinent information.
A lot of other documentation requires things like birth dates. The writers have never even considered how old the character is or what his birthday is.
At the end of the day, though, graphic prop artists like Ross and Jacob don't always know how the prop will be used when they're creating it. Sometimes these props are highlighted in the action, but sometimes you're doing a lot of research and work for an ID that may only be flashed on screen for a split second.
So incredibly elaborate prop, which we see in the episode like this. He just hands it across the counter.
Believe it or not, there's a blacksmith in Hollywood who specializes in making real swords for films and TV. Yes, actual swords for stars and stunt actors alike to cut, slice, and swing at each other. Sure, in some instances rubber swords are used, like when an actor does stunts that require falling. But as high-definition video has improved, using authentic-looking swords has become more important.
It needs to be real, so you can go in close, you can see it. And also, if an actor picks up a sword, he has that tactile feedback of the sword in his hand and working with it, as opposed to holding a baton and emulating on a green screen what's supposed to be happening. So it makes a big difference.
Jack Sparrow, Blade, Zorro, Peter Pan, and countless other movie stars use a sword as their weapon of choice. But to achieve an authentic look, plastic or rubber swords simply won't do. Forget about a prop house. These swords are created in a real blacksmith shop. The authenticity and speed with which these swords are made can only be done by a real blacksmith, like Tony Swatton.
I'm a smith. I'm a blacksmith, I'm a bladesmith, I'm a silversmith. I also work in copper and tin. I hit things with a hammer, so that's basically my job.
Swords made from real metal being heated, beaten, grinded, beaten some more, quenched, whoa, and polished, all for on-screen accuracy. For over 30 years, Tony's been making iconic weapons and armor in his shop, Sword and the Stone. He has over 200 feature films and TV shows under his belt.
Legend of Zorro and The Mask of Zorro. I made the principal swords for Antonio Banderas for Zorro. I did Pirates of the Caribbean. I did Pirates 1, 2, and 3, and 4.
He worked on the sword and that throwable glaive thingy for Blade, as well as...
I worked on Hook. I made the hook for the movie Hook, as well as the swords and background swords.
I know, it's not a sword, but he did the hook from Hook, and that's pretty cool. It starts with production sharing their sword needs and working with the blacksmith on the design. It's also crucial to decide what the sword will be made from.
A lot of times a film will contact me and say, hey, we have a movie, it's 12th century Scotland and we need to make a sword, what would you recommend? Or this is our design, how would you go about making it? We kind of work together with the prop master, the costume designer, the set decorator, and the production designer. A lot of times I'll have an input into what we make. Zorro's sword, case in point, it was actually a curved hunting sword from the 1500s. That was in the Tower of London and the Wallace Collection in London, and I cobbled those together and made it into more of a rapier, then shortened that down and embellished it with details from both swords.
Once the design is decided, multiple versions of the same sword will be created, depending on how the sword will be used on screen. A more authentic real steel sword is needed for close-up action shots, while an aluminum sword will be used for wider shots and sequences that require more movement.
This is the hero Jack Sparrow sword. This is formed out of steel, forged steel hilt, ebony grip. This is not a hero piece, this is a background piece. This is a stunt weapon.
This one feels way lighter.
It is way lighter. The hero piece is out of forged steel for the hilt and ebony for the grip. This is identical from here down. The blade is identical looking at it going up here, but this is made out of aluminum. This is an aluminum rapier. It's lightweight, it's dull, it's not going to cut anyone, but it has great properties. Goes back to true.
I don't know why I flinched there. I was like, ugh! The sword starts as layers of dissimilar metal welded together. In this instance, some of the layers are made from an industrial bandsaw blade originally used to cut down redwood trees. Yo! The metal is heated up, then hammered flat, either by hand or power hammer. Then folded over and flattened a few more times. The sword is ground down to its shape and is heat treated in an electric oven. This process brings the blade up to 1600 degrees. And then it's quenched in oil. This hardens the steel. Without this step, the blade would crack or shatter while in use. After that, more grinding and polishing. Tony also makes the grip, hilt, and pommel. It's all put together and voila, you have a sword. Seen here, my guy Brian swings the real sword. Its weight and authenticity makes for a realistic looking swing and action you can only get with a real sword. In case you couldn't tell, this is a pretty dangerous environment. Everything is either hot, sharp, or poisonous. Notice I'm not in any of these shots. That's because I'm behind the cameraman.
What makes me unique is the speed at which I can create these pieces. I'll put 35 swords together in a day for film production. The most swords that I've made for a single production has probably got to be Last Samurai. I made about 600 swords, predominantly aluminum weapons for the big battle scenes. But the crazy thing about that, I was working on both Master and Commander and Pirates of the Caribbean concurrently. So between those 3 productions, I did 1,000 swords.
And with that, Tony's ability as a blacksmith, the speed, authenticity, and the detail with which he can create swords is impossible to duplicate.